Hello, all. Comes time to review a science fiction TV series that was unlike any other that ever was or possibly ever will be again, and that is Michael Straczynski's brilliant Babylon 5, which was produced from 1993 to 1998. There were 110 episodes in five very specific seasons. And it had a 5-year story arc from the beginning, which was not common for television at the time, any television, not just science fiction television. But a number of things made it successful. One is the fact that Straczynski insisted that he not only be the primary writer, but that he be the executive producer, along with John Copeland and Douglas Netter, who he had met and worked with previously on Captain Power. And the Soldiers of the Future, which he was the principal writer on also. So because he was the producer, nobody could come along and mess with his scripts, and nobody could come along and mess with his concepts, say, I don't like it, I want this instead. He got the say. It was a grand, sweeping, quote-unquote, novel for television. Each episode was basically a new chapter in the novel, and that's the way it worked. Its stars are very numerous, and I can't list all of them, but primarily originally Michael O'Hare as Commander Sinclair, Myra Furlan as Ambassador Delenn, Andreas Katsoulis as Ambassador Jakar of the Narn, Peter Jurasik as Londo Mollari of the Centauri, Stephen Furst as Vir Koto, Londo's assistant, Billy Mooney as Lanier, Ambassador Delenn's assistant, the incredibly gorgeous Claudia Christian as Commander Ivanova, not one of my favorite characters. She is my favorite character on the whole series. She's quirky, she's funny, she's sexy, she's incredible, and a terrific second in command. I think she would have been a good first in command, quite frankly. The late Stephen Biggs, I should say, as Dr. Franklin. It starred, who else? Andrea Thompson as Talia Winters, a commercial telepath who's employed on the station, works for an organization called Psycor, and Patricia Tolman as Lita Alexander, another telepath who is not aligned with Psycor. Who I'm missing? Jerry Doyle as Security Chief Michael Garibaldi. The late Tim Choate as a hilariously funny character called Zathras, and he figures in two very pivotal episodes, Babylon Squared and War Without End, parts 1 and 2. I know I'm missing somebody, Mary Caitlin Brown as Natoth, who was Jakar's assistant, and there's also another woman who played Natoth later. I can't remember her name. I met Mary Caitlin Brown at a B5 convention. She's also a fantastic singer. A number of other great characters. Ed Wasser as Mr. Morden, a really creepy, sneaky character who is completely untrustworthy, who is a ambassador for this evil race known as the Shadows, or not necessarily evil, but they have dark intentions, let me put it that way. The overall plot is that it is now 5 years after a war between Earth and the Minbari, who are a humanoid species, only instead of hair, they have a bone that wraps around their head. And part of their spirit, they have a religious caste, a warrior caste, and what they call the Gray Council, who stand between the two of them. And during a first contact incident, they approached an Earthship with their gun ports open, which in their culture was a sign of respect. But the commander who saw this thought that their gun ports were open because they were going to fire on them, and he fired on the Minbari ship first and destroyed it and killed one of their leaders. And Delenn, who was the disciple of this leader, was one of the religious caste, I think, declared war, total war on Earth, and they almost wiped Earth out. And at the last minute, for some strange reason, at what was known as the Battle of the Line, which was commanded by Commander Sinclair, they stopped and gave up, essentially. They stopped their war with Earth, and they wouldn't let anybody know why. Very strange, mysterious set of circumstances. So that was... there was a pilot movie called The Gathering, where somebody had attempted to assassinate this mysterious alien known as Kosh, who was a Vorlon. The Vorlons are sort of an opposite to the race known as the Shadows. They're very old, an ancient race, very mysterious. Nobody knows what they look like because they wear these encounter suits. And the person who seems to have tried to assassinate him is Commander Sinclair. And Lita Alexander comes aboard as a telepath and somehow figures out that it wasn't him. It was somebody wearing something called a chameleon cloak or a change cloak. And that's the beginning of the story. But there were 5 series. Each one had a title. And I'm going to just highlight briefly, because there were 110 episodes, I can't go into each and every one of them. I'm sorry if I missed somebody's favorite episode. But it's very interesting. There were comedy episodes. There were very dramatic episodes. There were action episodes, war episodes. Really a multi-ranging series. And, terrifically well acted. The special effects were fantastic for the time. It's one of the first shows to use CGI extensively, and did a very good job, I thought, excuse me, for the time period. Some of the effects look kind of cheesy now, but they looked really good at the time. It was produced it was broadcast, I should say, on Warner's, and then later on their subsidiary channel, PTEN network. The first series is called Signs and Portents. And during this series, a number of clues come about and come into Commander Sheridan's possession. 1, about what really happened at the bottom of the line. 2, about a strange reemergence of a race known as the Shadows, who appeared to have led a war 1,000 years ago. But very few people know who they were, but various races mention them in their religious texts, including the Narn and the Centauri. There's a brief beginning of a subplot about telepaths versus normals, quote unquote, and that becomes very important in later episodes. So the ones that I really like from the first series, the first episode, Midnight on the Firing Line, the Narns attack a Centauri outpost, and this pits Ambassador Jakar versus Ambassador Mondo Malari against each other. It's interesting that in the development of the characters, and Straczynski did this purposely, in the beginning, Jakar, as played wonderfully by the late Andreas Katsoulis, is kind of a terrorist. He'll do anything basically to help his people who were oppressed historically by the Centauri, who are portrayed as sort of like the Romans. They're Rome in its declining years after the Visigoths attacked. And they want to get their glory and power back, but they don't really know how to do it. So that comes forth in Midnight on the Firing Line. And Sinclair has to try to, make the peace. Isn't entirely successful. 2 is one of the most interesting ones, called Soul Hunter. In this, a very strange being called a Soul Hunter arrives on Babylon 5. And what he does is he captures people's souls at the moment of their death and sort of puts them in these little spheres and saves them. It's like a collection. He tells Sinclair there's a hole in there. 1, they're using you, and 2, there's a hole in your mind. Remember that, because those things become prevalent later in this particular season. Number 3, Born to the Purple, talks a little bit more about Mondo Malari and his position within the Centauri, the fact that he's sort of looked at as a bit of a joke. And a sort of a spy arrives and tries to extract some information out of him. And I can't remember who played it. It's played by a very beautiful woman, and I can't remember her name for the life of me right now. I think it's Ann Turkel. I'm not sure. And then Mind War, episode number 6, pits Bester, who is the first time we see Bester. And I should make a note here. Walter Koenig played Bester, and his name, Alfred Bester, is taken from the science fiction writer Alfred Bester because he wrote a number of books about telepaths, particularly The Demolished Man. And that is about a murder that takes place in a society full of telepaths. And the question is, how can you commit a murder when everybody's a telepath? They all know each other's thoughts. And the answer is quite interesting. And it turns out that you actually can do it, but you have to do a lot of pre-planning. And he is pitted against, in some ways, Talia, even though Talia is a member of Psi Corps. and she is technically under his direction. It becomes clear that she does not like him, and that she doesn't really like the Psi Corps either. That has some interesting implications later as well, which I'll get into. Number 9 is a fantastic episode called Deathwalker with stars. And again, I'm sorry if I use this word a lot. It just happens to be true. The very beautiful Sarah Douglas, who I will always remember as the gorgeous Catherine Cornelius in the horrible film of Michael Moorcock's novel, The Final Program. You may also know her as Zara from Superman 2. But she was in that. She's also in one of my favorite Space 1999 episodes, the A.B. Chrysalis. Naked yet. Anyway, she plays this character called Jadur, who was a war criminal from a previous war known as the Dilgar Wars. And she is discovered hiding under a false identity, reveals that she has discovered a formula for immortality that will make any humanoid being immortal. The problem is another humanoid being has to die to produce the substance in the pituitary gland that makes people immortal. And she sort of is trying to foment chaos because she says, your people will fall on each other like wolves. Well, Sheridan Sinclair stops her. Very well done, very good performance, and really good costumes too. Her Jadur war outfit uniform I thought was really cool looking. Number 13, Signs and Portents, is the first one that really begins to hint at the existence of these beings of shadows, with the arrival of a character known as Mr. Morden, played by Ed Wasser, who goes around and starts asking questions to different alien ambassadors, including Londo Mollari. And he says to him at one point about, his war with the Narns, just pick a target. And Londo kind of thinks that will have rather tragic consequences later. But he implies that he has very powerful allies. These allies are later turned out to be the Shadows. Babylon Squared is a great episode. That's the one that stars Tim Choate. And it tells about what happened to Babylon 4. The first 3 Babylon stations were destroyed during construction. They were sabotaged. The 4th Babylon station, Babylon 4, disappeared about a month after it was completed, and nobody knows what happened to it. So Babylon 5 is the last of the Babylon stations, and it's what's called an O'Neill cylinder, and you can look that up if you want to find out what that means. But it's a real scientific term. Anyway, Sinclair, Garibaldi, and Delenn decide they're going to investigate when a strange kind of character appears on Babylon 5 and sort of lures them back to go to investigate the area where Babylon 4 disappeared, which I believe is an area near a mysterious planet called Sigma 957. And people are told to, quote unquote, avoid those who walk near Sigma 597. We'll find out what that means later. But they go and they see Babylon 4 reappear, and they go aboard, and then they are teleported back in time 1,000 years. They speak to this very interesting character, again played by Tim Choate, called Zathras, and he talks in these funny, a funny voice, and he's like, "No, not the one, not the one." These weird phrases. Excuse me, I have a cold, and is trying to keeps referring to somebody known as the One. And they try to figure out what he's talking about. Eventually he reveals the One isn't one person, it's 3 people. The One is Sinclair is the one who was. Delenn is the one who is. And Captain Sheridan, who we haven't seen yet, played by Bruce Boxleitner, is the one who will be. And we find out what that means in season 2. It also relates to the fact that one of the heroes of the previous war against the Shadows, which happened 1,000 years ago, was a Minbari named Valen, who was referred to as, quote-unquote, a Minbari not born of Minbari. And we don't know what that means yet, but we find out. Then they go back to B5, and they're sort of questioning what happened, but these things start to become clear. Episode number 21, The Quality of Mercy, is very interesting and important. It stars June Lockhart as a healer who is lives in the down below the poor sections of Babylon 5. And she has this practice where she can heal people who have relatively minor injuries with this strange alien healing device. At the same time, there is a serial killer who is about to be mind wiped, given the quote-unquote death of personality. And he somehow escapes and is now finds her and is threatening her. Well, it turns out that in reality, the alien healing device is not a healing device. It's a form of capital punishment. And she hooks up this alien. She knocks him out with the help of some of her friends and hooks him up to the machine. And she has a terminal disease, and through the machine, she transfers her terminal disease to him. And it's incredibly, excruciatingly painful. So there's a, poetic justice in that episode. And I really like that one. June Lockhart gives a fantastic performance. Number 22 is one of the odder episodes called Chrysalis. In that episode, Ambassador Delenn activates a strange alien device in her quarters and literally enters a chrysalis. When she exits, she will no longer be purely Minbari. She will be a human Minbari hybrid. And that plays out in the first episode of season 2, Points of Departure. Points of Departure, she emerges, and she's now half human and half Minbari. I guess that was a lot easier on Mira Furlan, that she didn't have to go through so long in the makeup chair. Interesting story about the time that the makeup took. Billy Mooney, when he first interviewed for Linear, asked the directors, how long will I have to be in the makeup chair? And they told him, oh, no more than like an hour or two. He says, okay. Goes in. 8 hours later, he comes out and he says to the guy, this character better not be the central character in this thing, because I have a wife and I have a daughter, and I'm not going to spend 8 hours just getting the makeup done, and we haven't even started shooting. And they told him, don't worry, Linear's not that central a character. But it turns out actually in some ways he was. But I thought that was interesting. Almost as interesting as the story about how Stephen Furst was cast as Veer. He went into the audition, and some people had already been told from the Straczynski Bible what the Centauri were supposed to look like, and they had the Centauri hair, which was sort of stiff, and his wasn't, and he thought, well, what am I going to do? He went into the bathroom, started putting soap on his hair. He got soap in his eyes. Now his hair's all messy. He's got soap in his eyes. He goes to the audition and says, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know the Minbari had hair like this, and I tried to make my hair poofy, and I got soap in my eyes, and I'm sorry. And they said, that's Veer. You're hired. Anyway, going back to season 2. Revelations is one where we start to find out a little bit more about Mr. Morden and things that may have happened to I forgot to mention. Commander Sinclair has now been reassigned to Minbar. He's going to be the Earth ambassador to Minbar. Captain John Sheridan has been hired to replace him. He is played by Bruce Boxleitner, and he takes over command. There are indications in Revelations that something odd happened to Sheridan's wife, Anna, on an exploration mission she was doing for IPX, Interplanetary Explorations, on a very strange alien planet called Zahadum. But we don't know exactly what happened. We don't know. It's apparently Anna Sheridan died on that expedition, but we don't know how. We don't know what happened to her. 3, The Geometry of Shadows, goes a little more into some of those ideas and also deals with Mr. Morden and what's going on with Londo Mollari and his growing sort of dependence on Mr. Morden to help him out with his war with the Narn. Chapter 9 expands on this, The Coming of Shadows. Emperor Turhan of the Centauri Republic comes to visit Babylon 5 and to meet briefly with Londo because he doesn't like some of the things he's been doing. Apparently, carrying out attacks on the Narn, for one thing. And he has a heart attack, and the Centauri have 2 hearts. He has a heart attack and dies. Before he dies, he whispers something to Londo. Londo says to other Centauri and to Veer that what he said was, take my people back to the stars, when in fact what he says is, we're all doomed. And he later repeats to Veer what he says. What did he really say? He says, we're all doomed. And that has implications. And this is also the first appearance of the group known as the Rangers, or the Anla Shak, who are led by a human, Marcus Cole. and played by Jason Carter. And there's a lot more about his character that we get into later. Number 14, In the Shadow of Zahadum, goes more into what happened to Anna Sheridan, and also starts the beginning of a group called the Night Watch, who are people who are distrustful of aliens and people who are not human on Babylon 5. And somewhat to our shock, one of the security officers, Zach Allen, played by the late Jeff Conover, signs up to the Night Watch. And they all wear these armbands. They're kind of like a Nazi organization. They spy on people and report on them, etc. And that's starting kind of a dark path. Number 19, Divided Loyalties. They break away from Sheridan, the Earth government run by President Clark, who is suspected of having assassinated his predecessor, President Santiago. Basically breaks away. Babylon 5, he wants to take over Babylon 5, and B5 breaks away. Sheridan declares that they're no longer part of Earth Force, and they're not going to wear Earth Force uniforms anymore. They're not going to obey orders from Clark because they think he's kind of, a madman and a dictator, which he is. And so a couple of things happen. Delenn makes new uniforms for all of them and goes through this ceremony where each one of them is supposed to reveal something that they've never revealed to anybody else. The one thing that I found, I didn't mention that I think in The Shadow of Zahadum, Lita Alexander, or in a previous episode, and I don't think I wrote it down, Lita Alexander came back on Babylon 5 because she suspected that the Psy-Corps had planted a quote-unquote sleeper agent, someone whose personality was suppressed, to act as a spy. And she interviews each one of the staff. Ivanova doesn't want to be interviewed because, unbeknownst to us, she's a latent telepath, and her mother was a telepath. And rather than take the quote-unquote sleepers, which are drugs that would suppress telepathic ability, she killed herself or joined Psy-Corps. She didn't want to join the Psy-Corps. So she's reluctant, but Lita scans her and says it's not her. And as she's leaving, she just casually scans Talia Winters and says it's her. And Talia's whole personality transforms. Well, previous to that, we had seen a scene of Talia and Commander Ivanova in bed. And obviously they had a romantic connection. So in Divided Loyalties, the thing that Ivanova says to Delenn that she had never spoken to anybody else is, I think I loved Talia. I thought that was great. That's one of the first, same-sex things on television, or on a television sci-fi show anyway. I think it's great that she, confessed that she was bisexual and that she had been in love with Talia Winters. Talia is killed at the end of that episode, or she's taken back to Psy-Corps, and they're gonna operate on her, which obviously is going to lead to her death. 22, The Fall of Night. The Night Watch really starts to take over and starts to threaten people and starts becoming a kind of a menacing force. The fall, and that has implications for what's going to happen in season 3. Season 3, which is called the Coming of Shadows, is it's Point of No Return. I'm sorry, Point of No Return is season 3. Season 2 was The Coming of Shadows. Voices of Authority is the first one where we find out about these ancient alien beings called the First Ones, and Ivanova and some others go out to try to find Delenn, I think, try to go out and find the First Ones, so they can round them up into their coming fight against the Shadows. And a political officer is assigned to Sheridan's staff, and he doesn't like her and thinks she's spying on him. She actually tries to seduce him, appears in his quarters naked, and he's rather shocked and doesn't go for it. But that has, something of a, throwback to the Soviet era, because the Soviets had political officers on submarines who were meant to see that they were following communist rules. Dust to Dust is a very strange episode where Bester comes back on board Babylon 5 to hunt down a distributor of a very illegal drug called Dust, which, if you take it, allows you to effect a kind of a mind rape. You can go into someone else's mind without their permission. And Jakar discovers this and takes it and does this to Londo, and almost kills him, but stops at the last minute and finds out about what he's been doing with Morden and the shadows, and that's significant. Point of no return is when Clark is really becoming a dictator, and he's declared war on Babylon 5. He's going to send troops after them. Number 10, Severed Dreams, where is the dissolution basically of the Earth Alliance happens in that episode. A very good episode, very well written. Ceremonies of Light and Dark I already talked about. Interludes and Examinations, number 15, is interesting in that we start understanding a plot with the Mars Resistance and some things going on with that. 16 and 17 is War Without End, which again goes back to the fate of Babylon 5 and what happened and how eventually Sinclair actually went into a chrysalis like Ivanova, or like Delenn, and when he came out, he was not Sheridan anymore. He was this character, Valen, the Minbari, not born of Minbari, and that explains that. That explains why he was not born of Minbari. Number 21, Shadow Dancing, is they're getting ready for the big fight with the Minbari had produced a ship called the White Star, which is a new, very powerful weapon meant to destroy shadow ships, and can destroy shadow ships with a very powerful destructive beam. And they're getting ready to have a big showdown with the shadows. And they have these like weird spider-like ships and make a horribly eerie noise in your mind. Number 22 is Zahadum. Well, also in a previous episode, I think it's in Shadow Dancing, Sheridan confronts Kosh and says, you're not helping us enough. I thought Vorlon said you're going to help us against the shadows. He said, if I can't help you personally, or else I won't be with you at Zahadum. He said, well, if that's your choice, if you choose not to be with me, I don't care, but I need your help now. He says, you don't understand, but you will. And we find out what he means in the next episode, Zahadum, where Sheridan goes to Zahadum, the home planet of the shadows, and he's going to destroy it. He's going to crash a White Star into the capital, and he does. They try to persuade him that they're not evil. One of their subalterns says, the shadows and the Vorlons are like your parents. They want you to do your homework and be good, and just keep doing what you're doing. The shadows, which is a silly name for them, by the way, they go around kicking over anthills. And when you kick over all the anthills, somebody new and more, only the best survive. So basically the shadows, and again, Straczynski kind of acknowledged this in a later episode, borrows quite a bit from Michael Moorcock's writings, and especially the idea of Lords of Law and the Lords of Chaos. Obviously, in this aspect, the Lords of Law are who want a static reality, are the Vorlons. The Lords of Chaos, who want reality to be ever-changing, are the Shadows. And Sheridan is a quote-unquote knight of the balance. He wants balance between the two forces. He doesn't want either one to take over entirely. Straczynski, like I said, acknowledged this in an episode where the one with the technomages, where the principal technomage played by Michael Ansara was named Elric. Well, Elric, of course, is Michael Moorcock's albino warrior hero, or I should say anti-hero, of many, many novels now, and that's his acknowledgement. Season 4, called No Surrender, No Retreat, has a number of really fine and interesting characteristics and plot lines. One of the things that runs through it is Michael Garibaldi had been an alcoholic and had struggled with it in his past and has defeated it. But things come along that make him slip, and that happens in the 4th season for various reasons. Number 1 is called The Hour of the Wolf. And in that, Ivanova goes to confront the forces of President Clark, and she's sort of in command of that force. Number 2, whatever happened to Mr. Garibaldi, Jakar has become concerned about the fact that Garibaldi went out on a mission and he never came back. And he's not sure what happened to them. They think that he was killed, but they're not certain. Number 3, the summoning, goes deeper into that. Jakar continues to investigate what happened to Garibaldi, and also there's a thing about the the Night Watch and some things about the Mars resistance is starting to grow, and they might be helpful in defeating the Shadows. So they're going to try. They send Marcus Cole and Dr. Franklin to try to stop them. And they send them as a married couple, which I think is really funny. And Marcus is making like ruthless fun of that, making all these jokes about who's going to look after the kids and all that stuff. It really has a lot of fun with it in that role. Jason Carter really obviously had a great time doing that. The Long Night is a good episode. Again, a little more into Mars resistance and what's going on with Earth versus Babylon 5 and President Clark. Number 6, Into the Fire, is the final showdown between the quote-unquote Army of Light and the Shadows at Coriana 6, and they defeat them. And number 7 is Epiphanies, is where Garibaldi resigns from Trouble Babylon 5, and he goes back to Mars. And we don't know why. We don't know why he resigned. It's kind of a mystery. 11 is the lines of communication, has more to do with them trying to contact the Mars resistance, and they do, and they don't trust them at first, and they're going to have him killed and all this, and they convince them not to, and that they're on the level. And also, Delenn encounters a strange alien species known as the Drakh, who were apparently the allies of some of the allies of the Shadows, and they're angry that they defeated the Shadows, and they want revenge. Number 12, Conflicts of Interest, has to do with a guy named William Edgars appears on Mars, and he's trying to recruit Michael Garibaldi to work for him. He's got some sort of project going that has to do with controlling telepaths. This is the episode where Harlan Ellison actually appears in an episode, and he has a couple of lines. He was able to speak lines because he is a member of the Screen Actors Guild, was a member, I should say, of the Screen Actors Guild. And you can't speak a line on a TV show or in a movie unless you are a member of the Screen Actors Guild. You can walk on set, you can do a cameo, but you can't speak unless you're an SAG member, and he was. So he got to speak a line, which I think is, you don't want us to do a full rework on him? And then Bester says, no, it's not necessary, and he just shakes his head yes. But I thought he was good in that. Number 17, The Face of the Enemy, Garibaldi betrays Sheridan to the Night Watch and forces on Mars, and he is taken captive. And it's implied sort of that he's doing it against his will, but we don't really quite know yet. Episode 19, Between the Darkness and the Light. Ivanova takes command of Babylon 5 because Sheridan has been captured, and Garibaldi is captured by the Mars Resistance, and they are torturing him, and he tries to confess his innocence, that he didn't do it, or he did it against his will. Number 20, Endgame. Clark's forces are defeated, and one of Sheridan's old allies turns his ship against the Earth after threatening to destroy Babylon 5. He says, this is an illegal order, and don't you recognize it? And he says, yeah, you're right. And then the other ships that are with him turn against Clark as well, and he is deposed. Number 21, Rising Star, is very tragic. It happens in the aftermath of the Earth attack, and they didn't destroy B5, but B5 is damaged, and Commander Ivanova is mortally wounded, and she's rushed to the infirmary. There's really nothing they can do about it. Marcus Cole is beside himself because he has been secretly in love with Ivanova for a long time and never told her. And he asks the ship's computer, is there anything that I can use to help him? They said, well, no, nothing. And he eventually somehow finds out about the alien healing device, and he uses it. He hooks himself up to it and her up to it, and he sacrifices his life for hers, literally. And she's very upset after this happens, that she resigns her command. Season 5 is called The Wheel of Fire. And again, there were a lot of sort of filler episodes in Season 5. I should mention that something happened between Season 4 and Season 5. They thought they were going to be canceled at the end of Season 4, so they wrote the final episode, Sleeping in Light, and shot it and directed it before the beginning of the filming of Season 5. Also, Claudia Christian had, somehow there was a miscommunication between her and her agent about when she had to sign the contract to be in season 5, and she missed the date. And apparently that was inadvertent. She didn't mean to do it. She just missed the date, and so they couldn't use her, under SAJ rules. So they hired instead Tracy Scoggins to play the character of Captain Elizabeth Lockley, who comes on board in the 5th season. That happens in the first episode, No Compromises. Captain Lockley comes aboard, and she and Sheridan were apparently lovers at one point. She is also a recovered alcoholic, so she has kind of a connection with Garibaldi, even though he doesn't really like her and doesn't trust her. And also a group of rogue telepaths led by a character named Byron, played by Robin Atkin Downs, comes aboard and asks for sanctuary. They are fleeing the Psi Corps. They don't want to be part of the Psi Corps. They want a sanctuary on Babylon 5, and Sheridan's kind of divided about whether he should give it to him or not. Lita's trying to exert her pressure and, say, well, look, I helped you win the Shadow War. Can't you help me do this? And he's still a bit resistant. Number 8, Day of the Dead, which was written by the wonderful writer Neil Gaiman, great British writer, was about the Mercury have this thing called the Day of the Dead, where they take over ownership of a part of Babylon 5, and then it becomes the quote-unquote Mercury territory. And each of the people whose cabins are in this territory has a sort of a vision. And some of them are interesting, some of them, aren't. The most interesting one is that Mr. Morden, who's dead, by the way, at this point, he was killed by Londo in a great episode. I don't remember which one it was, but he's on... he has come to... the Vorlons have decided, after the Shadows are defeated, that they're going to destroy any planet that had contact with the Shadows. And they start doing it with these giant ships called Planet Killers. And one of them is headed towards Centauri Prime. And Londo Mollari, who is now the Emperor, having killed the mad Emperor Cartagia, or actually it was Vir who killed Emperor Cartagia, but by accident, which I thought was interesting, says that he's going to remove all shadow influence. And Morden says, what are you going to do? We got ships on your island of Prabini, and, what are you going to do? Blow them up? And he says, what are you going to do? Blow up the island? And he says, as a matter of fact, and he takes this button and he pushes it and the island explodes and the shadow ships are destroyed. And then, so that's referenced again in Day of the Dead. Mr. Morden he killed Mr. Morden and tortured him and cut his head off and put it on a pike, like Vir had said, I'd like to live long enough to see your head put on a pike. I would wave at your dead eyes like this and smile, and he does that in that episode, which I thought was great. So Mr. Morden tells Lanier, you will betray the Anlashak. And we don't know what that means until much, much later. It has some rather tragic consequences. Number 10, A Tragedy of Telepaths, is where there's a confrontation between Bester's Psi Corps and the rogue telepaths, and it does not end well. Phoenix Rising ends that, and they're basically all killed, which I thought was really awful, really tragic. That storyline, by the way, the storyline about the telepaths was not supposed to be about Lita originally. It was supposed to be about Ivanova, because as we learned, she was a latent telepath. But when Claudia Christian was unable to renew her contract, they had to rewrite it, and they rewrote it for Lita. It works fairly well, particularly the idea of a romance between her and Byron, and her torn feelings between the two, because she doesn't have any loyalty to Psi Corps, but she also knows that they're not as pure as they say that they are. And but it has a tragic ending. Darkness Ascending, episode 15. Lise Hampton, who was the lover of Michael Garibaldi, comes onto Babylon 5 and confronts him about his return into drinking and wants him to stop, and says, come back with me to Mars, and we'll work it out, basically. And he agrees he's going to do that. I missed a plot in here, and I'm sorry, but there was a whole subplot about William Edgars and the telepaths, and he was trying to create a drug which would basically neuter any telepath. It would destroy their telepathic ability, and he doesn't care whether he kills telepaths to do this. And he is stopped by Bester at the last minute and killed. And that's sort of what... And also, Bester frees Garibaldi's mind and tells him he's the one who influenced him to turn over Sheridan. He also says that he placed a block in his mind. He cannot harm Bester unless that block is removed, and he has no intention of removing it. Um, and so that's why Garibaldi slid back into drinking, because of that revelation and the fact that he can't do anything about it. The fall of Centauri Prime has to do with the idea that the Centauri have been carrying out these attacks on the non-aligned worlds, and nobody knows why. It turns out that Londo Mollari has been possessed by a creature that we saw in an earlier episode called the Drock Keeper, which is sort of an octopoid creature that attaches itself to your neck and takes over your will. And since it's in control of his will, he has no say. He says something very interesting to Veer at one point. He says, "When I first came to Babylon 5, I had no power and all the choices I could ever hope for. And now I have all the power I could hope for and no choice at all." And that's the tragedy of Londo Mollari. He made the wrong choices, and he's paid for it, literally in the end, as we find out, with his life. Number 20, episode 21, Objects at Rest. Lanier does betray the Almashak. He is trapped on a ship with Lanier and Sheridan, and in hyperspace, and they somehow find a way out. And Sheridan is trapped in a compartment, and Lanier can rescue him, and he starts to decide not to. And last minute, he's struck by his conscience, and he goes back and rescues him. But Sheridan knows now that he was going to betray him, and he leaves and goes off into deep space. Leaves a message for Delenn. "I'm sorry, I betrayed you. I don't agree with your marriage to Captain Sheridan, but I should not have let my emotions get in control of me, and someday I'll hope I'll be worthy of your love." And he goes away, which I think was kind of a crappy ending for the character of Lanier, and Billy Movie agrees. I think he was kind of written out because he objected a little bit too much about the makeup process and everything, and then Straczynski kind of got pissed off at him. I don't know if that's true or not. Number 22, the final one, Sleeping in Light. This character, Lorien, who rescued Sheridan on Zahadum, gave him 20 years of extra life, but said, "That's all. You're going to live for 20 years, and then you'll just stop one day." Well, 20 years have gone by. All of the surviving members of the B5 crew, including Commander Ivanova, who's now General Ivanova, and she says, "I feel like an old warhorse they parade out on celebration days." Delenn and Sinclair are living on Minbar, and all of their other remaining friends, Londo Mollari and Veer, and not Lanier because he left, and a couple of the others, Dr. Franklin and Garibaldi, all gather on Minbar for one last sort of celebration dinner with Lanier, with Delenn and Sheridan. And then some interesting things happen in there. And one of them is that Mollari gives Sheridan a vase with quote-unquote water from one of the rivers in Centauri Prime. What's actually in the bottom of the vase? And he tells them, "When your son turns 18, have him open it." What's actually in the bottom of the vase is a Drock Keeper. And if you want to find out what happens, you got to read some of the novels that tell you about what happens afterwards. But the novels by Peter David address that. And they're quite good, so I do recommend that you read them. Also, finally at the end, they mention that Lanier is gone. They don't really talk about him much. You see a later scene, Veer is now the emperor, and he's been awakened, and he's in bed with 3 women, which was quite different from the shy character that he was at the beginning. I thought that was an interesting thing. And then finally, Sheridan, his time has come. He takes a white star and he says goodbye to Delenn in a very tender way, gives her a last kiss, and he goes off, quote unquote, beyond the rim, where the first ones and the Vorlons in the Shadows went at the end of the Shadow War. Goes back to Coriana 6 and vanishes. And we don't really find out what happened to him, but of course we're not supposed to. Death is a mystery, and it's supposed to be a mystery. It was a really great show, really great costume. It was nominated for 3, and it won, I should say, 3 Emmy Awards, a Hugo Award, a Nebula Award, a Saturn Award, and 2 In Space Awards. Great costumes, great sets, great music by uh, Stephen Copeland, and I can't remember the other guy. And just really well acted, well done, well written, fantastic series. If you have not seen it, they're all available on DVD and Blu-ray. I do not believe they're available on streaming, but they might be someday. Were some subsequent movies. There was a movie called, there was The Gathering, which happened before. It was kind of the pilot. There was Third Space, which came after, and in the Babylon 5 in the beginning. There's also an animated feature called The Road Home, and there was a sort of a vignette of just two short stories, and I can't remember for the life of me what that was called, but it was pretty decent. And hopefully, I don't know if there's actually going to be a reboot now because Warner's has taken back the rights, but it's possible. And if they do a reboot, I hope they get just as good a cast as they got in the first place, which is going to be very difficult considering how many of them have passed on.